Today we will be basically discussing about the evaluation of a limping child. Because evaluation of DDH when a patient or child comes to you, it is not written on his face that I am a case of DDH. What the child comes to you in the OPD, when the child comes with the parents, he basically has limping. And the most common presentation of DDH in Indian scenario at least is a limping child. Okay, so basically we will discuss in two parts. First is evaluation of a limping child, and then we will come to DDH evaluation and management also today. Next. So before limping, you should be aware that what are the prerequisites for a normal gait. So there are various prerequisites for a normal gait. Number one is a strong skeleton. The skeleton should be uninterrupted. There should not be any fracture, pain, anything like that. So that the skeleton should be strong enough to support the weight of the body over both the lower limbs. This is the first prerequisite for a normal gait. The second is equal lower limbs, very important. So both the lower limbs, the length of both the lower limbs, it should be equal, and both should be parallel to each other for a normal gait to happen. And third is the strong muscles. The muscles of the lower limbs, they should not be only strong, but they should be balancing each other. Okay, and there should not be any co-contractions. Like in cerebral palsy, we see that there is co-contraction of rectus femoris as well as hamstrings. So ultimately what happens is there is stiff knee gait. So when one muscle is contracting, the other must be relaxing. That is, antagonist must be relaxing. So the muscles should be strong enough to take care of the moving joint. Now the next prerequisite for a normal gait is supple joints. There should not be any stiffness. The joints should be supple. Okay, there should be reasonably good range of motion in the hip, knee as well as ankle. And the joints should not be deformed, and they should be stable, and they should not be wobbly at all. Okay, so abnormality in any of these prerequisites will lead to limping. If the skeleton is not strong enough, the lower limbs are not equal, the muscles are not stronger, the joints are stiff, and if there is any deformity or unstable joint. So any problem in any of these will lead to limping. Now, another important factor is, even if all these are alright, but there may be pain somewhere in the body or in the lower limbs or in the spine. So this may also lead to a limping. Okay. But for the today's lecture, sake of today's lecture, we are not going to discuss about a limping that is painful. We are only discussing a painless limp. Next, please. Now coming to history. So as usual, whenever you are evaluating a patient, there is history, then examination, then special test, then investigation. So first is a history. So what are the points in history you should take? So first you should ask or see whether the limping is bilateral or it is involving only a single lower limb. So bilateral or unilateral limb. There are some important causes of bilateral limb so that you can rule out. There are very few causes. First is diplegia. That is spastic diplegia in a case of cerebral palsy. One of the important cause of bilateral painless limping. And second is CMT. That is hereditary sensory and motor neuropathy. That is Charcot-Marie tooth disease. Then third is spina bifida. Spina bifida, it is involving the lumbar region or the sacral region. Then what happens is there is bilateral lower limb type of paralysis. I mean lower motor neuron type of paralysis leading to limping bilaterally. Then muscular dystrophy, another cause of limping, that is bilateral. And the most common muscular dystrophies which we come across in day-to-day practice is the Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Okay. Now other important causes are bilateral DDH or bilateral Coxa-Vara. We will discuss in detail about bilateral DDH. Now the next point, once you have determined whether the limp is unilateral or bilateral, is when was limp first observed? Whether it was observed immediately once the child starts walking. So the normal age of starting to walk is 12 to 15 months or maybe 18 months. So if a child is limping right from the day one when he started walking, then most probably you are dealing with some congenital problem like bilateral DDH or unilateral DDH or maybe coxa vara. But if initially there was no limping, but gradually as the child is growing, you notice that the parents notice that there is some limping, then there are some acquired causes. And one of the important acquired causes maybe is muscular dystrophies. So parents will tell the doctor, initially when the child started walking, he was normal for first 2-3 years. Now he is tripping again and again and he is losing balance and he is falling. So that means you should immediately click in your mind that probably I am dealing with some muscle disease. Okay. Now the next point in evaluation history is that whether it is progressively worsening or not. So again, muscular dystrophies, there will be progressive worsening of the limping. And also if diplegia or maybe this diplegia is not taken care of at an appropriate age, it may progress and ultimately the child may land up in a crouch gait. Okay, so these are the important points in history. Next please. Now coming to examination. Now the first point in examination, of course we are dealing with a child having a limp. So you have to observe the gait of the child. So gait of the child can be observed in two ways. First is the clinical examination and second is the laboratory gait analysis. So we are talking today only about the clinical gait examination. So when a child you are examining for gait, clinical gait, then you should not look only from the front, but you should look also from the side and you should also see from the back. And it is always wise to take a video recording, because in the OPD timing when there are a lot of patients, you have to evaluate many things. Better is just ask somebody to take the video of a child in an open area, maybe in the physiotherapy hall. You just make a video. When you are relaxed, you have no other patient, no other work to do, then you just observe. Okay, you can pause, you can again play, you can play faster so that it will be easier to analyze the gait. But on the first instance, you should try to look from the front, that is coronal examination, and then from the side. Now what are the things you will examine? It will be a systematical examination. Now first is the general observation. Is the gait expected for age? So usually the adult pattern of gait develops by say 5 to 6 years of age. Okay. Before that, when the child starts walking, there are certain peculiarities of gait in a child. So what are these? So number one is the step length is shorter in a child. So that is called as cadence. Cadence is shorter in a child. Now the second thing is that the gait is wide based. Okay. So it is more unstable type of gait, and to cover the same distance the child has to take more steps than an adult. Okay. And the fourth thing you have to notice is that usually when we walk, then there is symmetrical and reciprocal movement of the upper limbs. Symmetrical and reciprocal. But in a child it is not there. So you have to observe that the gait is appropriate for that particular age. First prerequisite is this. Then you have to again observe which side is abnormal. Left side or right side or both sides are abnormal. Then in sagittal plane, what are the things you will see? So first you see foot and the heel. So you have to observe which thing is contacting first the ground. Immediately after the swing phase, what happens is the heel strikes first. So if heel is striking first or not, whether toes are striking first. So you have to observe this. Then you have to see in the mid stance, the complete foot is in contact with the ground or it is not there, it is not happening. Okay. Then you have to observe the timing of heel raise. Okay. In the terminal stance, there will be heel raise. Then you are satisfied that I have observed the foot of the child. Then you should concentrate on the knee of the child, knee of the patient. Now, knee, the important point is that in the stance phase, for progression of the gait, the knee must extend fully. Okay. So in mid stance, the knee should extend fully, and if it is not extended, you should observe and note it down. Then again, at the time of swing phase, to clear the ground, not only your hip should flex, but your knee should also flex. Okay. So this cyclical movement of maximum knee flexion to maximum knee extension, you should notice. Okay. And if there is any problem or if it is incomplete, then you should note. Then again, that foot clearance is adequate or not. Many a time what happens is that because of some muscular weakness or because of some permanent deformity or contracture of the foot, the child might be dragging the toes. Okay, so you should observe that the clearance of the foot during the swing phase is adequate or not. Next. Now, what are the things you will examine from the front? That is from the coronal plane. So you have to examine the foot progression angle. All of you are aware of foot progression angle. That is, it is slightly externally rotated. So if you ask the child to walk in a straight line, and if you take impression of the foot, then you will observe that there is an angle of about 15 to 20 degree which is externally rotated. So foot progression angle is important. You have to observe. Then is there any circumduction? So what happens, many a times the knee is stiff. So to clear the ground, the patient tries to circumduct through the hip joint to clear this thing. So you have to observe whether there is any circumduction or not. Then you have to observe whether there is excessive swaying of trunk, because it is a very characteristic feature of Trendelenburg gait that when the patient is on the fully weight bearing on the affected side, then because of abductor weakness he will lurch on the same side to negate the effect of gravity. So you have to observe this also. So once you are satisfied with your gait examination, then the next comes is the palpation. So you have to palpate whether there is any swelling, whether the muscles are soft to firm, whether there is any abnormal swelling, whether any contracture, deformity or not. All this is routine examination. Then you have to move whether there is any stiffness in hip, knee or ankle or foot, and then you have to measure. Because LLD, whether apparent or true, both are important causes of limping. So this we will come next. Now what are the other tests you can do? So many a time, suppose a child with the CP GMFCS 1 or 2 comes to you, it will seem that he is absolutely normal child when he is walking at a slow pace. So it is always best to ask the patient to run slightly or to move at a faster pace, because sometimes the abnormalities are better revealed when the child tries to run or walk faster. So always ask to run. Then ask the patient to get off the floor. Ask him to squat and then ask him to get off the floor. Okay? Then ask to tiptoe. So these are basically nothing but you are examining the weakness of any particular or specific muscle groups. Okay? Then ultimately you have to examine the spine and neurological examination. Okay? So this is in short about gait analysis and additional tests. Next. Now what are the common types of limping which you observe? So the common types of, number one is short limb gait. So the characteristic of short limb gait is that if the shortening is not very severe, it is less or very moderate shortening, then what happens is there are some compensatory mechanisms which come into play. The compensation, they can happen in the same limb or in the opposite limb. So in the same limb, there may be equinus. The child may try to compensate by equinus, while on the opposite side he may try to flex the knee as well as hip. Okay, so these are the compensatory mechanisms. While if LLD is severe, then these compensatory mechanisms may fail and it may be completely revealed. Okay. Now the next type of limping common is Trendelenburg limp. So all of you are aware that if there is problem in the fulcrum or in the lever or in the power of the hip joint, then there will be Trendelenburg type of gait. So basically the most commonly we come across is either there is fulcrum problem, non-united neck fracture, or maybe some muscular weakness. Okay, or in cases of DDH the fulcrum is problematic. Okay, so the characteristic of this type of gait is unilateral. I am talking about that when the child walks, there will be swaying of the trunk to the same side. Okay. But if it is bilateral, it is very difficult to differentiate what exactly is the problem. And then if bilateral Trendelenburg is there, it is called as waddling gait. Now next type of gait is the stiff knee gait. So what happens is, it is most commonly seen in those cases when there is co-contraction of hamstrings as well as quadriceps. And it is very commonly seen, not very commonly, but occasionally seen in spastic diplegia or hemiplegia. So, as I already told you that in the swing phase there should be adequate flexion of the knee, while in the stance phase there should be complete extension of the knee. If it is not adequate, then it will be a stiff knee gait, and you should be able to diagnose this. Then another type of gait is hand to thigh gait, and it is most commonly seen in quadriceps weakness, so that to push the knee backward when the quadriceps is not working, the child just pushes the thigh backward to move forward. Then high stepping gait, all of you are aware, and equinus gait is very clear that there is equinus and there may be dragging of the toes on the floor. So it is very prudent to examine the toes of the child. Okay. And another thing, when you are examining a child with limping, is just look at the footwear. Okay, footwear will tell you very important things, because when there is abnormal pressure at particular point, the footwear will be, will show this. Next. Now, what are the differential diagnoses of limping? I am talking about painless limp. So first differential diagnosis is LLD, because of any cause. Okay, it may be a functional LLD, it may be a true LLD. So congenital causes most commonly are short femur, there may be proximal femoral focal deficiency, there may be coxa vara, there may be any of the fibular or tibial hemiplegias, and sometimes you may get congenital posteromedial bowing of tibia. It is a benign condition but causes shortening of the limb. Okay. So these are the important causes of congenital shortening of the limb. Then what are the acquired important causes? First is trauma. Trauma may lead to malunion of the fracture. It may ultimately lead to LLD. Okay. It is a cause of limping. Then trauma also causes physeal damage. So immediately the child may be normal, but as the child grows, the involved physis may be lagging behind, and there may be shortening of that particular limb. Not only shortening, but there may be coronal deformity, that is genovalgum or verum, if it is involving around the knee joint. Okay. Infection, another cause of physeal damage. So you should always ask in history also. So these are the important acquired causes of LLD. Now the next thing you have to determine is whether I am dealing with a case of true LLD or apparent LLD. So all your measurements of hip during your examination will tell you whether it is apparent or true LLD. And all of you are aware that apparent LLD is because of pelvic obliquity. Okay. So pelvic obliquity can be of two types. It can be a infrapelvic cause, it can be suprapelvic cause. So any fixed contracture of the hip will cause infrapelvic pelvic obliquity. Okay, so if there is abduction contracture, so there will be pelvic obliquity, there will be apparent lengthening of the limb. Okay, the ASIS will be lower than the opposite side, while the reverse will be true in the adduction contracture, adduction contracture, so that there will be apparent shortening and there will be abnormal position of ASIS. So all these are important causes of infrapelvic pelvic obliquity. Now what are the suprapelvic causes of pelvic obliquity? The pelvis may be oblique in structural scoliosis. Okay, not the compensatory scoliosis, but the structural scoliosis, so that if there is lumbar or thoracic curvature on the convex side, there will be apparent lengthening. Okay, so it is an important cause of suprapelvic type of pelvic obliquity. Next, now the second important DD after LLD for limping is muscle weakness. Muscle weakness, it may be because of upper motor neuron lesions, and the most common we come across is the cerebral palsy. And in the lower motor neuron type, polio is not commonly seen nowadays, but spina bifida is still a common etiology of this. And another important, not very frequent, but once in a while we come across is hereditary motor and sensory neuropathy. These are all causes of lower motor type of palsy leading to muscle weakness and limping. And muscle diseases, dystrophies or myopathies. Okay, you should be aware of all these. Next. Now the third DD of limping is joint stiffness. Stiff knee, most commonly. It may be because of quadriceps contracture, it may be because of some injection in the quadriceps, ultimately leading to contracture, or maybe infection, or maybe trauma. It may be ankylosis because of some juvenile idiopathic arthritis. It may be in cerebral palsy, co-spasticity of rectus as well as hamstrings. It will lead to stiff knee gait. The next important differential diagnosis is joint deformity. Coxa vara, it may be unilateral, it may be bilateral, or muscle contractures. Okay, again, commonly seen in cerebral palsy. Next. Now the next important, last but not the least, is joint instability. Another important cause of limping, painless limping. So joint instability in hip is commonly seen as delayed presentation of DDH. A child who is under 4 years of age and comes with painless limping, the diagnosis is DDH unless proved otherwise. You have to remember this. A child who is under 4 years of age presenting with painless limb, the diagnosis is DDH unless proved otherwise, and you should always look to rule out DDH. Now knee instability. It is not that only hip instability causes limping. Knee instability commonly seen in infantile Blount's disease or maybe Larsen syndrome, where there is laxity of multiple joints. Okay, next. Now this is a very important exam point. What are the causes of unilateral Trendelenburg gait? So for a child, the important you have to differentiate, and it is very difficult sometimes, is to differentiate between DDH and septic hip sequelae. Many a times we don't know whether we are dealing actually with DDH or we are dealing with a septic hip sequelae. So in DDH, there are certain points which will guide you towards diagnosis. First, you should always ask whether it was a breech delivery, because there is higher incidence of DDH in breech delivery. Most of the time the child is a female child. So DDH is very much more common in females, while clubfoot is more common in males. You should remember this thing. Then family history sometimes may be possible. Then there will be supratrochanteric shortening, very important characteristic of DDH is there will be limitation of abduction. Limitation of abduction is very important finding, while the power of abductors will be normal. Now coming to this side, that is septic hip sequelae. There may be history of nursery admission, there may be history of febrile episodes during childhood. Then it may involve any gender, male or female. Family history will not be there. Supratrochanteric shortening again will be there. Important point. Exaggeration of hip movements. Since most of the times the femoral capital epiphysis is destroyed and hip joint is unstable, so hip is very wobbly in infantile hip sequelae. While in the DDH actual the limitation of abduction is there. While here there will be more abduction and more movement. So this is a very important characteristic to differentiate whether it is a infantile septic hip sequelae or a DDH. And again power of abductors will be normal. Okay, stop.